The mining colony on Helio 7 had gone silent 3 days ago, and Commander Zekthor stood at the viewport of his ship, staring down at the lifeless planet below. 200 miners had simply vanished without any explanation or warning. There were no signs of struggle, no bodies left behind, just empty living quarters and machines that still hummed with power as if the workers had simply stepped away for a moment and never returned. Zeki. Thor was a veteran commander of the Galactic Council patrol fleet, and he had seen many strange things in his 40 years of service, but this was different. Something about the silence from Helio 7 made his mandibles click nervously, and his instincts screamed that whatever happened here was beyond anything he had encountered before. The mining facility below looked perfectly normal from orbit, with all systems functioning and lights still on in the corridors, but the complete absence of life made it feel like a tomb. He turned to his communications officer, Pris, who was a slender creature from the Phelan species with large, dark eyes that reflected the glow of her console. She had been working frantically for the past hour, trying to piece together what had happened, and her membrane had grown pale with worry. Zekthor approached her station and placed a hand on the console edge. The commander's voice was firm when he spoke. "Send a distress signal across all council frequencies and mark this as a Code Crimson emergency. Whatever took those miners might return, and we need reinforcements immediately." Pris nodded quickly, but her fingers hesitated over the controls, and Zekthor noticed the fear in her expression. She looked up at him with those large eyes filled with something that looked like dread. "Commander, there is something you need to know before I send the signal." The miners managed to send their own distress call before they disappeared. Zekthor felt his body tense. "Show me the transmission." Pris pulled up the data on the main screen, and what Zekthor saw made his blood run cold. The distress signal had not been sent to the Galactic Council headquarters or any nearby patrol fleets. Instead, the transmission had been directed to a single location in a distant arm of the galaxy. The coordinates led to Sol 3, which was more commonly known as Earth. The entire bridge crew had stopped their work and turned to look at the screen. Earth was the homeworld of humanity, and the species that had joined the Galactic Council only 5 cycles ago. Humans were known throughout the galaxy as the species from the Death World, and their planet was considered one of the most hostile environments any spacefaring race had ever evolved on. Stories about Earth spoke of massive predators, deadly diseases, extreme weather, and gravity so strong it would crush most species within hours. But there were other stories too. Whispered stories that most council members dismissed as exaggeration. Tales of human ships appearing in sectors where no vessels should be and then vanishing without explanation. Reports of dimensional anomalies that humans seemed to know about before official sensors detected them. Rumors that humanity possessed technology far beyond what they had shared with the Council. Zekthor studied the transmission data and noticed something else. "When did they send this message?" Pris checked her console. 4 days ago, Commander. A full day before they sent their official distress call to us. The implications were clear and troubling. The Vakrian miners had encountered something so terrifying that their first instinct was not to call the Galactic Council military, but to call the humans. What did these miners know that the Council did not? What made them believe that humanity could help when the most advanced military force in the galaxy could not? The tactical officer suddenly spoke up from his station. "Commander, I am pulling up the final transmission from the colony. You need to see this." The main screen changed to show grainy security footage from inside the mining facility. The timestamp showed it was recorded just hours before all contact was lost. Vakrian miners ran through metal corridors in blind panic with their tools and equipment abandoned where they fell. The lighting flickered and sparked, and the walls seemed to bend and twist in ways that should have been impossible. Then something appeared in the footage. It was massive and dark, and it seemed to exist in multiple places at once. The creature or entity or whatever it was moved through solid walls as if they were smoke. When it touched surfaces, reality itself seemed to crack and splinter like broken glass. The miners screamed and fled, but there was nowhere to run. The transmission ended with a final desperate whisper in the old Vakrian mining tongue. "Not of this universe." Zekthor felt his hearts hammering in his chest. He had fought in 3 wars and survived encounters with the most dangerous species in the galaxy. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for what he had just witnessed. That thing in the footage was not natural, and it did not belong in their reality. He forced himself to speak calmly. "How long until Council reinforcements arrive?" Pris checked her console and her voice trembled when she answered. 17 standard hours at best, Commander. Zekthor nodded slowly. 17 hours was a long time to wait with that thing possibly still on the planet below. He was about to order his ship to maintain a safe distance when Pris made a surprised sound. Sir, you need to see this. A ship just dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system. The tactical display updated to show a single vessel entering the Helios 7 system. It had appeared without any of the usual energy signatures that accompanied hyperspace exits. One moment the space was empty and the next moment the ship was simply there. Pris's voice was confused and uncertain. Commander, they are hailing us now. It is the humans. The main view screen changed to show the interior of the human vessel. A man appeared on screen with short brown hair and calm blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He wore a dark military uniform with insignia that Zekthor did not recognize from any official council records. The human's expression was neutral, but there was something in his eyes that reminded Zekthor of old veterans who had seen too much death. The human spoke with a voice that was steady and professional. This is Captain Ryan Mitchell of the UESS Harbinger. We received the distress call from the Helios 7 mining colony. Request permission to dock with your vessel and assess the current situation. Zekthor glanced at his tactical officer, who was staring at his console with an expression of complete confusion. The officer looked up and his voice was barely a whisper. Commander, that ship is not showing up correctly on our sensors. The readings make no sense at all. Zekthor moved to the tactical station. Explain. The officer pointed at his display where numbers and data streams flickered and changed constantly. The mass signature keeps shifting, sir. One moment it registers as a small frigate-class vessel and the next moment it shows as a dreadnought 10 times that size. The energy readings are completely unlike anything in our database. It is as if the ship exists in multiple states simultaneously. Captain Mitchell waited patiently on the view screen, and his calm expression never changed. Zekthor looked at the human, and then at the planet below where something impossible lurked in the abandoned mining tunnels. He made his decision. Permission granted, Captain Mitchell. You may dock with our vessel, but I must warn you that whatever happened on Helios 7 is beyond anything we have encountered before. It may be beyond our ability to handle. For the first time, the human's expression changed and something flickered in those blue eyes. Something old and knowing and perhaps a little sad. Captain Mitchell's voice was quiet when he replied. Commander Zekthor, that is exactly why we are here. The docking process took 30 minutes, and during that time, Zekthor's engineering team reported increasingly impossible readings from the human ship. The vessel seemed to phase in and out of normal space, and its hull appeared to be made of materials that existed in multiple dimensional states at once. Several engineers requested permission to evacuate the docking bay because their instruments kept giving them warnings that made no sense in conventional physics. When the airlock finally opened, Captain Mitchell stepped through, followed by a team of 6 humans. The first person Zekthor noticed after Mitchell was a tall woman, with bright red hair pulled back in a severe military style. She moved with the grace of a trained fighter, and her green eyes swept across the Vakrian bridge with an intensity that made several crew members step back instinctively. Mitchell gestured to her as they approached. This is Lieutenant Kate Sullivan, my tactical officer. Behind Sullivan came a massive human male who stood at least 2 meters tall with broad shoulders and arms that looked strong enough to bend steel. He carried weapons on his belt that hummed with barely contained energy, and Zekthor's security sensors screamed warnings about the technology. Mitchell noticed the commander's concerned look. Sergeant Jack Barnes, our weapons specialist. The equipment is safe unless activated, Commander. The rest of the human team spread out across the bridge, taking positions that Zekthor recognized as tactical surveillance points. They were professional and efficient, and they moved like soldiers who had seen real combat. But there was something else about them. Something in the way they held themselves and the way their eyes seemed to see things that were not quite there. Mitchell dispensed with any formal greetings and got straight to business. Where's the colony? Zekthor pulled up the holographic display showing Helios 7 rotating slowly in the center of the bridge. Second planet in this system. We have detected no life signs from the surface, but there is an unusual energy reading coming from the central mining shaft. Our scientists cannot identify the signature. A woman from the human team stepped forward. She was shorter than the others, with dark hair and sharp, intelligent eyes behind thin glasses. She studied the holographic data for several seconds before speaking. That is a dimensional tier. Something crossed over from another reality. Pris, the communications officer, made a sound of disbelief. Impossible. Dimensional travel is purely theoretical. No species in the Council has achieved anything close to that level of technology. The humans exchanged glances with each other, and Zekthor noticed something pass between them. It was the look of people who shared a secret, a heavy secret that they had carried for a long time. Captain Mitchell's expression became serious, and his voice carried a weight that made everyone on the bridge stop and listen. Commander Zekthor, there is something fundamental that you need to understand about Earth and about humanity. There is a reason we developed differently than every other species in the galaxy. Mitchell gestured to Lieutenant Sullivan, who activated a small device she carried on her belt. The device projected holographic images into the air above the bridge, and what appeared made several members of Zekthor's crew cry out in fear. The images showed creatures that defied all natural laws, beings made of impossible geometries that hurt to look at, shadows with teeth and eyes where no eyes should be, things that could not exist in normal reality. Captain Mitchell began to speak, and his voice was steady but grim. Earth is not just classified as a death world because of predators or gravity or disease. Our planet sits on a weak point in dimensional space. The barriers between our reality and others are thinner on Earth than anywhere else we have discovered in the known galaxy. Humanity did not just evolve to survive our environment. We evolved to survive what comes through the cracks in reality. The scientist, with the glasses, stepped forward, and Zekthor heard Mitchell call her Dr. Lisa Chen. She pulled up more images showing ancient human structures covered in strange symbols, and ruins that seemed to predate human civilization itself. Every culture on Earth has legends of monsters and demons and things from beyond our world. For thousands of years we thought these were just stories and myths. Then in the year 2087, the first major dimensional incursion happened. Something broke through the barrier in what used to be North America, and nearly wiped out the entire continent before we learned how to fight back. Zekthor felt his world tilting.
Fight back how?
How does one fight something that exists outside normal reality? Sergeant Barnes smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. We learned to go into the cracks ourselves, Commander. We studied the things that came through. We captured them and dissected them and learned how they existed. Then we built technology that let us follow them back. We turned the hunters into the hunted. Mitchell gestured toward the viewing port where his ship was still docked. The UESS Harbinger is not a conventional military vessel, Commander. It is a dimensional warfare platform. We have been preparing for encounters like Helios 7 since we joined the Galactic Council. We hoped we would never need to reveal what we are capable of, but that hope died when your miners were taken. Lieutenant Sullivan spoke up, and her voice was cold and factual. Earth has experienced over 300 dimensional incursions in the past 2 centuries. Some were small, just a single entity breaking through. Others were massive events that threatened entire continents. We have fought and died learning how to close the breaches and push the entities back. We have built weapons and ships and trained soldiers specifically for combat in spaces that most species cannot even perceive. Zekthor felt betrayed, and his voice came out harsher than he intended. You kept all of this secret. You joined the Council, and pretended to be just another species while hiding. The fact that you can travel between dimensions and fight creatures from beyond reality itself. Dr. Chen's expression softened slightly. Would you have accepted us if we had told the truth? If humanity had arrived at the Council chambers and announced that we routinely breach dimensional barriers and employ weapons that work by manipulating the fabric of reality itself? You would have quarantined our entire species as too dangerous to interact with. Captain Mitchell nodded. We made a choice, Commander. We decided to join the Council and earn trust slowly. We shared conventional technology and kept our dimensional capabilities hidden. We hoped that by the time the truth came out, we would have built enough goodwill that the Council would understand why we developed the way we did. Before Zekthor could respond, every alarm on the bridge began screaming at once. Pris's voice rose above the noise. Commander, something is emerging from the mining shaft on Helios 7. The main view screen changed to show the planet's surface. From the central shaft, a massive form was rising into the sky. It was the same entity from the security footage, but seen in full scale, it was even more horrifying. The creature stood kilometers tall, and its body shifted between states of matter and energy. Where it moved, space itself seemed to crack and splinter like broken glass under pressure. Captain Mitchell was already moving toward the airlock. All personnel back to the Harbinger immediately. Commander, evacuate your crew to minimum safe distance. My team will handle the situation. Zekthor grabbed Mitchell's arm. Handle what exactly? What is that thing? Mitchell's expression was grim and ancient. We call them Void Walkers. They are predators from the spaces between dimensions. They feed on populated worlds by consuming the life energy of entire civilizations. Helios 7 was just an appetizer. If we do not stop it now, the creature will move on to more populated systems. And you can actually stop something like that? Mitchell pulled his arm free gently. We are human, Commander. We have been fighting things like this since before we discovered fire. The difference now is that we fight back with more than spears and courage. We fight with weapons designed specifically to kill entities that should not exist. Dr. Chen stopped at the airlock long enough to meet Zekthor's eyes. You asked what humanity brought to the galaxy, Commander. We brought war, real war, the kind that makes your species' conflicts look like children playing games. Because we have been fighting a war that you did not know existed against enemies you cannot imagine since before your species reached for the stars. The human team rushed through the airlock back to their ship. The Harbinger detached from the Vacrian vessel and began moving toward Helios 7. As it accelerated, Zekthor watched the human ship begin to change. Its hull started to shift and twist into configurations that hurt to look at directly. The vessel seemed to exist in multiple locations simultaneously, and reality itself bent around it like water flowing around a stone. On the planet below the void, Walker continued to rise and its form blotted out the sun. Thousands of eyes opened across its surface, and each one was a window into howling darkness. The creature raised appendages made of condensed void and reached toward the approaching human vessel. Zekthor stood frozen at the viewport, watching humanity bring their light to fight the darkness. Part of him wondered if the galaxy would survive learning the truth about what humans really were. Another part wondered if the galaxy could survive without them. The Void Walker stood 2 kilometers tall against the dark sky of Helios 7, and its form constantly shifted between solid matter and something that resembled antimatter but was neither. The creature had no face in any conventional sense, but thousands of eyes opened and closed across its surface like stars blinking in and out of existence. Each eye was a window into a dimension of pure screaming void where reality itself had no meaning. When the creature's appendages touched the ground, the planet's crust cracked and reality fractured like glass under a hammer. Commander Zekthor stood on the bridge of his ship, maintaining what his tactical officer assured him was minimum safe distance. The Vacrian fleet had pulled back 50,000 kilometers from the planet, and even at this distance their sensors were struggling to process what they were witnessing. The readings made no sense, and half the instruments had simply shut down. Rather than try to display impossible data, the human vessel Harbinger approached the Void Walker, and against the scale of the creature it looked impossibly small. It was like watching an insect challenge a mountain. But as Zekthor watched, the human ship began to change in ways that made his eyes hurt, and his mind rebel against what it was seeing. The hull of the Harbinger started displaying symbols and patterns that seemed to move when he was not looking directly at them. Geometric shapes formed and dissolved across the ship's surface in configurations that violated every law of physics Zekthor had ever learned. Pris spoke from her console, and her voice was shaking. Commander, the human vessel is opening multiple dimensional portals around its position. I count at least 30 distinct breaches in local spacetime. Captain Mitchell's voice came through the communication channel, calm and professional. Harbinger to all vessels. Maintain your current distance. We are about to breach the dimensional veil. What you are about to witness is classified as extreme hazard event. Do not attempt to approach or interfere. Zekthor wanted to demand answers, but the words died in his throat as the Harbinger opened fire. The weapons that emerged from the human ship were nothing like conventional energy weapons or missiles. They were tears in reality itself. Controlled breaches that opened portals into spaces that should not exist. Through these portals came things that made the Void Walker seem almost comprehensible by comparison. Geometric entities that existed in 12 dimensions simultaneously poured out of the portals. They were shapes that hurt to perceive, angles that could not exist in 3-dimensional space. Behind them came creatures of pure energy that sang in frequencies which shattered matter at the molecular level. The sound they made was not sound at all, but something that vibrated through multiple dimensions at once. But the worst things that emerged from the portals were almost human. They moved like people but wrong, their limbs bending in ways that bones should not allow. Their faces were recognizable as human features, but the expressions they wore were alien and terrible. These things had once been people, Zekthor realized with growing horror. These were humans who had been changed by exposure to other dimensions. The tactical officer had somehow gained access to classified human military files, and his voice trembled as he read from his console. Commander, according to this data, those entities are called echoes. They were once human volunteers who underwent permanent transformation by spending extended periods in deep dimensional layers. The process is irreversible. They can never return to normal space permanently. They are living weapons created specifically to fight entities like the Void Walker. Zekthor felt sick. The humans had not just learned to fight dimensional entities. They had transformed their own people into monsters to do it. How desperate must humanity have been to create such things? How many had volunteered for this fate, knowing they could never go back to being human? On the planet's surface, the Void Walker shrieked. The sound transcended normal space and resonated through multiple dimensions simultaneously. Every sensor on Zekthor's ship screamed warnings, and 3 crew members collapsed with bleeding ears despite the fact that no actual sound had reached them. The creature struck back with appendages made of condensed void, weapons that unmade matter at the atomic level by simply touching it. But the human echoes were ready. They moved with impossible speed, intercepting the void weapons and somehow absorbing the attacks. Zekthor watched in amazement as the echoes grew larger and more terrible with each attack they absorbed, feeding on the very thing that should have destroyed them. They had become predators that hunted predators. A new voice came through the communications channel, a woman speaking with scientific precision. Voidwalker confirmed as Class 7 entity. Origin breach detected in mining shaft at coordinates marking 973. Lieutenant Sullivan, deploy your team and seal that breach immediately. That was Dr. Lisa Chen giving orders. On Zekthor's tactical display, he watched as 6 human soldiers in specialized armor dropped from the Harbinger in individual pods. They fell through the Voidwalker's attacks, moving as if they knew exactly where each strike would land before it happened. The soldiers dove into the mining shaft and disappeared from sensors. The tactical officer pulled up more stolen data files. Commander, those soldiers are wearing temporal echo armor. The suits contain processors that allow the wearer to perceive multiple probable futures simultaneously. They are not predicting where attacks will be. They are seeing the attacks happen in multiple timelines and choosing the path where they survive. Zekthor stared at the data. The humans had not just mastered dimensional travel. They had learned to manipulate time itself, or at least to perceive it in ways that let them cheat death. Every revelation about humanity's capabilities made them seem more alien and more terrifying. These were not the friendly explorers who had joined the Galactic Council 5 years ago. These were warriors who had fought wars in spaces where the laws of reality were suggestions rather than rules. Deep underground, Lieutenant Sullivan and her team were doing something that the sensors could barely track. Reality around the mining shaft began to stabilize and solidify. The dimensional tear that had allowed the Voidwalker to enter their universe was being sealed from the inside. The humans were manipulating the fabric of space-time itself, stitching reality back together like surgeons closing a wound. The Voidwalker sensed what was happening. It turned its full attention away from the echoes and focused on the Harbinger. The creature began gathering energy for an attack that made everything it had done before look like a gentle touch. Space itself began to warp and bend around the Voidwalker as it prepared to unleash something that would tear through normal reality like paper. Captain Mitchell's voice came through the channel one last time. Harbinger engaging Protocol Omega. All crew seal dimensional anchors. We are going in, Zekthor shouted into his communicator. Going in where? Captain, what are you doing? But he already knew. The human ship accelerated directly toward the Voidwalker at speeds that should have torn it apart. At the moment of impact, the Harbinger did not collide with the creature. Instead, both ship and entity vanished from normal space in a flash of twisted light that left afterimages burned into the eyes of everyone watching. For 3 heartbeats, silence filled the bridge. Every sensor showed empty space where both the human ship and the Voidwalker had been. Zekthor felt his heart stop. Had the humans sacrificed themselves? Had they taken the creature somewhere and died destroying it? Then reality tore open like a wound and the Harbinger emerged alone. The ship looked battered and scorched, and parts of its hull were still phasing in and out of existence. But it was intact and its crew was alive. Behind it, the dimensional rift sealed itself with a sound like the entire universe sighing in relief. Captain Mitchell appeared on the view screen looking exhausted and pale. Voidwalker neutralized, Commander. We pushed it back through the barrier and sealed the breach. Lieutenant Sullivan reports the origin point on Helio 7 is secured and closed. Your miners are gone. Once a Voidwalker feeds, there is no recovery possible. I am sorry for your loss. Zekthor found his voice, though it came out rough. Where did you take that creature, Captain? What did you do to it? Mitchell's expression was grim and haunted. We showed it a place between dimensions where even the monsters have nightmares, Commander. There are spaces in the deep layers where ancient things live, things that make Voidwalkers look small and weak. We took it there and gave it a choice. Return to its home dimension and never come back, or stay there with the things that hunt in the deepest dark. And what lives in those deep places that could threaten such a creature? Mitchell was quiet for a moment before answering. Some of them are echoes, Commander. Humans who went so deep into dimensional space that they can never return. They have been hunting in those spaces for decades, becoming more powerful and more terrible with each year. Some of them barely remember being human anymore, but they still serve humanity's purpose. They guard the deepest layers and they destroy anything that tries to use those spaces to reach our reality. The implications crashed over Zekthor like a wave. Humanity had not just learned to fight dimensional entities. They had colonized dimensional space itself. They had seeded the layers between realities with weapons and watchers. They had turned the infinite spaces. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened 36 hours after the incident at Helio 7, and the Grand Chamber on Station Unity had never seen such tension in its 200-year history. Representatives from 47 species gathered in the massive amphitheater, their holographic forms creating a circle of alien faces all focused on the center platform. Commander Zekthor stood at the witness podium, still shaken from everything he had witnessed, his formal testimony having taken 3 hours to deliver, but every eye in the chamber was focused on the human delegation, standing at the accused platform. Captain Ryan Mitchell stood with his shoulders straight, and his expression neutral, flanked by Admiral Linda Carter, who commanded Earth's Dimensional Defense Force, a military organization that no one in the Council had known existed until 2 days ago. Behind them stood Lieutenant Kate Sullivan, Dr. Lisa Chen, and 3 other humans wearing uniforms that bore insignia, which made military analysts throughout the chamber very nervous. High Counselor Thrent spoke first, his massive crystalline body reflecting light in patterns that indicated deep concern. He had led the Galactic Council for 2 centuries, and his voice carried the weight of age and authority. Captain Mitchell and Admiral Carter, you stand before this council accused of maintaining an unauthorized military force, developing prohibited weapons technology, and deliberately concealing information vital to galactic security. The charges include violation of 47 articles of the Galactic Accord. How do you answer these accusations? Admiral Carter stepped forward, and Zekthor noticed she was older than Mitchell, with gray streaking through her brown hair. Her eyes were hard with the kind of experience that came from making impossible decisions and living with the consequences. High Counselor, with all due respect, we have violated nothing. The Galactic Accord specifically prohibit weapons of mass destruction in normal space. They make no mention of dimensional warfare because until last week the Council did not know that dimensional warfare was possible. Counselor Vexton of the Hreekan Dominion rose from his seat, his scales rattling with anger. A convenient technicality, Admiral. You deliberately hid the truth about your species' capabilities. You concealed what humanity truly is and what you are capable of doing. That is deception regardless of legal technicalities. Captain Mitchell's voice cut through the murmurs that followed. What are we, Counselor? Please say it clearly. What do you believe humans are? The chamber fell into uncomfortable silence. Finally, Counselor Risha of the Palin Collective stood, her voice trembling with barely controlled fear. You are monsters. Not a spacefaring species that simply evolved on a harsh world. You are predators that learned to hunt in dimensions we did not know existed. You have weaponized the very fabric of reality itself. What else have you hidden from us? What other capabilities do you possess that we do not know about? Dr. Lisa Chen stepped forward, and her expression was sad rather than defensive. You want the complete truth, Counselor? Very well. Yes, Earth sits on a weak point in dimensional space where the barriers between realities are thinner than normal. Yes, humanity has experienced incursions from other dimensions throughout our entire evolutionary history. Our myths and legends are not just stories. Our monsters were real. And yes, approximately 200 years ago we stopped running from them and started fighting back. She activated a holographic projector that filled the center of the chamber with images. The assembled council members watched in growing horror as the recording showed human soldiers fighting creatures in dimensions, where geometry followed different rules. Massive installations built in the spaces between realities, enormous structures that looked like fortifications stretching across dimensional barriers that should not exist. Admiral Carter's voice was steady as she explained what they were seeing. This is the Bulwark. It is a defensive network we have been constructing across dimensional space for the past century. The system is designed to detect and intercept dimensional entities before they can break through into normal space. Helios 7 happened because something found a way past our sensors and detection grid. We have already closed that gap and it will not happen again. High Counselor Thrent leaned forward. You claim you have been protecting us? Making decisions about galactic security without our knowledge or consent? You appointed yourselves as guardians over species that never asked for your protection? Mitchell's expression hardened. We are saying that while the Council has been peacefully exploring this galaxy, humanity has been fighting a war to ensure you had a galaxy left to explore. Do you know why dimensional entities do not simply pour through into normal space and consume every living world? Because we have spent 2 centuries teaching them that attempting to enter this reality means facing humanity. We made ourselves into apex predators in dimensional space so that nothing would dare challenge us. He pulled up a new holographic display showing a map of known space overlaid with dimensional readings. Dozens of points glowed red across the galaxy, indicating locations where the barriers between realities were thin enough for entities to potentially cross over. The sheer number of vulnerable points made several council members gasp. Lieutenant Sullivan added more data to the display. There are 73 known dimensional weak points in council space. Before last week, 38 of those locations had experienced incursion attempts. The council never knew, because we intercepted and stopped them before they became visible threats. Helios 7 was the first time we failed to respond quickly enough to prevent casualties. Counselor Vexton was shaking with rage. And you made all these decisions alone? You decided without asking anyone that you would be the guardians of the galaxy? Admiral Carter's voice turned cold. Counselor, when humanity made first contact with the Recon Exploration Fleet 15 years ago, your ships were investigating dimensional anomalies near the Outer Rim territories. Do you remember what your report said you found? Vexton's scales paled. The readings were determined to be instrument errors. We found nothing. Those were not instrument errors. Your fleet stumbled directly into a Class 9 breach event. A predator entity large enough to consume an entire solar system was preparing to cross over into normal space. Lieutenant Tom Brady and his dimensional warfare team intercepted the entity before your sensors even registered the full threat. Brady gave his life sealing that breach. He was 26 years old. The hologram changed to show a young human male frozen in the moment before he sacrificed himself to close a dimensional tier. The image showed him surrounded by impossible geometry while reality shattered around him. His face showed determination rather than fear. The chamber fell completely silent as the weight of that sacrifice settled over them. Mitchell's voice was rough with emotion when he spoke again. You want to know what humans are? We are the species that sends our children into literal nightmares so that your children can sleep safely. We are the species that looked into the infinite darkness between realities and decided to go in armed and ready to fight. We are the species that became so dangerous that the things which hunt across dimensions learned to fear. Thus Dr. Chen brought up a final display showing a chart of dimensional incursion attempts over the past 50 years. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of prevented breaches and thousands of entities stopped at dimensional barriers. It was evidence of an entire shadow war fought in spaces that most species could not even perceive, let alone survive in. Her voice was soft but clear. The question is not why we did not tell you. The question is whether you really want to know everything we have done to protect you. Whether you can accept knowing that every peaceful day you have enjoyed exploring the stars only happened because humans were fighting and dying in dimensions you cannot imagine to keep the monsters away from your worlds, High Counselor. Thrent was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his crystalline voice was quieter and more thoughtful. What do you want, Admiral Carter? Why reveal all of this now? Because Helios 7 changed the situation. The entities are becoming bolder and more intelligent in their attempts to breach into our reality. They are testing our defenses in ways we have not seen before. We need resources and support and cooperation. More than that, we need the Council to understand that this is not just humanity's fight anymore. It never was. We simply happen to be the species that evolved the capability to fight it first. Admiral Carter looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of as many representatives as she could. We are not asking for medals or gratitude or praise. We are asking for the opportunity to face this threat together, to teach other species what we have learned, to build defenses that span both dimensional and normal space. Because eventually something will break through that even humanity cannot stop alone, and when that day comes, we will all need to stand together. The silence that followed was profound and heavy. The Galactic Council had convened to pass judgment on humanity for their deceptions and their hidden military power. Instead, they found themselves confronting the uncomfortable reality that they had been protected all along by a species they had never fully understood. Protected by warriors fighting in shadows against horrors they could not imagine. Counselor Risha spoke. 6 months after the Helios 7 incident, Commander Zekthor found himself standing in a place that should not exist according to everything he had learned about physics in his long military career. The Dimensional Combat Training Facility orbited Earth, but not entirely in normal space. Parts of the massive structure phased in and out of reality, creating a building that was somehow larger on the inside than the outside. Around him, soldiers from 17 different council species, trained in specialized environment suits that allowed them to perceive and briefly survive exposure to dimensional space. Captain Ryan Mitchell approached from across the training floor, and his dimensional warfare armor gave him an appearance that Zekthor had slowly grown accustomed to over the past months. The armor existed in multiple states simultaneously, which made Mitchell look slightly blurred around the edges, as if he was not quite fully present in normal reality. Behind him, Lieutenant Kate Sullivan led a mixed squad of humans and aliens through a training simulation that involved sealing a minor dimensional breach. The non-human soldiers moved with obvious difficulty compared to their human instructors, but they were learning and improving with each session. Mitchell stopped beside Zekthor and gestured at the training exercise. They are doing better than we expected, actually. Your people have good instincts for this kind of work. The Phelan have natural dimensional sensitivity that gives them an advantage. The Reckon sensory organs let them track entities across multiple reality layers. They will never be as effective as humans who have had 2 centuries to adapt and evolve. But they do not need to be. They just need to be able to recognize threats and support human teams when necessary. Thor watched a Vakrian pilot practice flying a phase-capable interceptor, with Kate Sullivan coaching her through the process of shifting between dimensions. The pilot's movements were awkward but determined. The Council approved funding for 40 new dimensional monitoring stations to be built over the next 5 years. Each station will be staffed by mixed crews of humans and other species working together. Mitchell nodded. Admiral Carter was pleased when she heard. We are also receiving volunteers from species we never expected would be interested. Apparently, once you tell people there is a war happening in spaces they cannot normally see, some of them decide they want to help fight it. They walked together through the facility, passing training rooms where the impossible was now taught as routine procedure. A Phelan engineer worked alongside Dr. Lisa Chen to modify dimensional sensors for use by non-human species. A Hrikan soldier practiced hand-to-hand combat techniques against holographic dimensional entities, while a human instructor provided guidance. Everywhere Zekthor looked, he saw species that had been strangers just months ago now, learning to work together toward a common goal. I heard that the Council is still receiving opposition to the cooperation programs, Zekthor said as they walked. Counselor Vexton has filed 17 separate motions trying to limit human dimensional warfare capabilities. Mitchell's expression became slightly sad. Some people are afraid, and fear makes them want to control what they do not understand. Vexton's entire species is terrified because they finally realized how vulnerable they have been. They lived for generations, not knowing that their continued existence depended on human protection. That kind of revelation breaks some people's sense of security, and they lash out trying to regain control. An alarm chimed softly, and both officers checked their wrist displays. A minor dimensional fluctuation had been detected near the training facility, but the automated defense systems had already contained and neutralized it. 10 years ago, before humanity joined the Council, such a fluctuation might have grown into a breach event. Now it was handled as routine business, barely worth mentioning in reports. Mitchell led Zekthor to a part of the facility he had not visited before. They entered a long corridor with walls covered in names. Thousands upon thousands of names carved into metal panels. Human names mostly. But now new sections had been added showing Vakrian names, Phelan names, Palon names, and others. These were the casualties of the dimensional war. Every person listed here died fighting in dimensional space, Mitchell said quietly. Some were veterans who served for decades. Others were fresh recruits who only survived a few missions. When we started training other species, we made absolutely certain they understood the risks. Dimensional space changes anyone who enters it. Even brief exposures can have permanent effects on mind and body. If something goes wrong, there is no guarantee. We can bring people back or that they will return as themselves. Zek. Thor studied the names, thinking about the volunteers from his own species who had applied for dimensional warfare training. Young Vakrians who had heard about what happened to the mining colony and decided they wanted to make sure it never happened to anyone else. But they volunteered anyway. They did. Because they understand something fundamental that some council members still refuse to accept. This is not just humanity's war, and it never was. We were simply the first species to develop the tools to fight it. But the entities that lurk in dimensional space do not care what species they consume. They would happily feed on any inhabited world if given the chance. They left the memorial and walked back through the training areas. Everywhere, soldiers from different species worked together, learned together, and prepared to defend realities together. It was imperfect and messy, and there was still suspicion and cultural friction and political arguments in the council chambers. But there was also progress. The galaxy has changed in 6 months, Zekthor said as they reached the docking bay where his shuttle waited. Half a year ago, we thought we understood reality and our place in it. Now we know we were children playing in ignorance while wars raged in spaces we could not perceive. Mitchell looked out through the transparent hull at Earth, turning slowly below them. Ignorance felt safer. But ignorance could not last forever. Eventually something would have broken through that we could not contain quietly. Better to face the truth now while we still have time to prepare together. What comes next, Captain? Where does humanity lead us from here? Mitchell's expression became serious. We keep training and keep building and keep watching, because the entities we have faced so far are just the beginning, Commander. There are things in the deep dimensions that we have barely glimpsed, ancient things that predate our species or any species we know. Some of them are starting to notice that humanity has claimed the spaces between realities as our territory. Will we be ready when they come? Ask me that question in 5 years or 10 years or when the next major incursion happens. But I will tell you this, Commander. For the first time since humanity discovered what was really waiting in dimensional space, we are not facing it alone. That has to count for something. Zekthor extended his hand in the human gesture of farewell, and Mitchell grasped it firmly. It counts for everything, Captain. My people owe humanity a debt we can never fully repay. You fought for us when we did not even know we needed protection. Mitchell shook his head. We did not fight for gratitude, Commander. We fought because those miners sent a distress signal. And humanity answered. That is what we do. That is what we have always done. When someone calls for help, we come armed and ready no matter what horrors wait in the dark. As Zekthor's shuttle departed the training facility, he looked back at Earth through the viewport. The planet appeared peaceful and blue, giving no indication of the wars it had endured or the warriors it had produced. He thought about the revelation that had shaken the entire galaxy, that humanity's entire existence had been shaped by contact with entities from beyond normal reality. The distress signal from Helios 7 had brought humanity into the open and forced them to reveal what they truly were, not conquerors or colonizers, but guardians who had been standing watch at the boundaries of reality itself, warriors who fought in dimensions others could not perceive against enemies others could not imagine, protectors who had been keeping the galaxy safe while everyone else remained blissfully unaware. The galaxy would spend centuries processing what that revelation meant. Political structures would change, military doctrines would be rewritten, and scientific understanding would advance in ways previously thought impossible. But the most fundamental change was simpler and more profound. The Galactic Council had learned that reality was thinner and more fragile than they had believed. They had learned that monsters were real and that they lurked in spaces between dimensions, waiting for opportunities to break through and feed. They had learned that ignorance was not safety, and that threats existed which conventional military forces could never hope to fight. But they had also learned that they were not alone in facing these threats. That humanity had been preparing and fighting and dying to protect civilizations that did not even know they were in danger, that when a distress signal was sent into the dark, something answered with weapons and courage and determination. In the deep dimensions beyond normal space, ancient entities that had once considered this galaxy easy prey began to reconsider their plans, because the news had spread through dimensional layers that humanity had revealed themselves. The species that had turned the spaces between realities into their hunting ground